Candle the lantern in the fog. They say the fog in Hollow's End was different. It wasn't the kind that drifted gently over hills or crept along the riverbanks. No, this fog moved like it had a purpose, thick and heavy, curling through the village streets as though it were searching for something it had lost. Back then, some 50 years ago, Hollow's End was a quiet place. A line of cottages with smoking chimneys, a crooked church bell, and a narrow road that led to nowhere in particular. Children ran barefoot down the dirt path with paper masks on their faces, and the old women hung dried herbs above their doors to keep away the autumn spirits. They didn't call it Halloween then. Around here, they called it the Night of the Lanterns. Every year on that night, the villagers would place lanterns outside their homes, small glass globes glowing warm against the mist to guide friendly souls back to their loved ones. But if you looked closely, you'd notice one lantern that never went out, even long after midnight. It stood alone at the edge of the forest, just beyond the old wooden fence where no one dared to go. That was where the legend began. My grandfather used to tell me about it when I was a boy, his voice low, the room dark except for the oil lamp flickering between us. He said there was something buried deep within those woods, something ancient and patient. The shadow with the lantern, he'd whisper. It doesn't walk under the moon. It waits for the fog. At first, I thought it was just another fireside story meant to keep children indoors after sunset. Every village had one, a ghost in the well, a witch in the woods, a curse in the mirror. But the way my grandfather spoke about it made my skin crawl. He never laughed afterward, never called it a tale. He'd just stare into the lamp flame, eyes reflecting the same orange glow he described in his stories. He told me that once, long before my time, there had been a man named Elias Crow, a pumpkin farmer who lived on the far side of the valley. Elias was a solitary man, quiet and kind, but his fields had gone barren for years. No rain came, no harvest grew, and the ground beneath his boots cracked like broken pottery. Then, one autumn, everything changed. The pumpkins grew again, enormous, glowing faintly even after dusk. People came from miles away to see them, but when they asked Elias what had happened, he only smiled and said, "The shadows were kind to me this year." The villagers thought it was a joke, until the following Halloween night. That year, the fog came thicker than ever before. You could barely see your hand in front of your face. The church bell never rang that night, its sound swallowed whole by the mist. And through the quiet, someone saw it, a faint orange light moving slowly between the trees. Not like a torch, not like a man's lantern. It swayed with a strange rhythm, as if carried by something that wasn't quite walking. The next morning, Elias Crow was gone. His house stood empty, the door open, the pumpkins in his field blackened and hollow. They searched for him for 3 days, but all they found were footprints leading into the forest and none coming back. From that night on, the people of Hollow's End began leaving a lantern by the forest fence every year, right where the fog grew thickest. They said it was a way to keep the pumpkin shadow from wandering into the village. As long as the lantern burned till dawn, the spirit of Elias Crow would stay asleep beneath the soil. For decades, the ritual never failed. But 50 years ago, the year I turned 15, something went wrong. That Halloween, the fog came earlier than usual. The villagers were still lighting their lanterns when it rolled down from the hills like a gray tide. I remember standing by my window, watching the world vanish beyond a few steps of mist. The air smelled of wet leaves and cold iron. And somewhere, faint but clear, I heard it, a soft clinking sound, like glass tapping against metal. When I asked my grandfather if he had lit the forest lantern, he went pale. His hand trembled as he set down his pipe. He whispered, "No, the lantern boy didn't come this year." Every year, one of the younger men was chosen to carry a fresh lantern to the forest edge. It was tradition, a duty passed quietly from one generation to the next. But that year, the chosen boy had fallen ill, and no one had taken his place. The lantern at the forest fence never burned. And yet, through the fog that night, an orange light still moved. I saw it myself. From my window, beyond the field, between the trees, a flicker of warm, trembling glow, rising and falling, growing brighter with each passing minute. My grandfather came to the window too. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, in a voice I'll never forget, "That's not our lantern, boy." The wind howled then, sharp and hollow. The trees bent as if bowing to something unseen. The orange light pulsed once, like a heartbeat, and vanished. That was the last night my grandfather spoke of the shadow. He passed away the following spring, taking his stories with him. But every autumn since, when the fog creeps over the valley and the lanterns begin to glow, I find myself staring at the forest line. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I see that same faint orange shimmer, moving between the trees like a memory that refuses to die. Candle the forgotten field. There are places in every village that no map will ever mark. Places people simply stop walking toward. For Hollow's End, that place was Crow's Field. You could reach it if you followed the main dirt road past the mill and took the narrow path behind the ridge of birch trees. The air there always felt different, heavier somehow, like you were walking through breath that wasn't yours. Even in summer, when the rest of the valley hummed with crickets and the scent of wildflowers, Crow's Field stayed silent. The soil was rich, black, and oddly warm to the touch, and sometimes, if you pressed your ear to the ground, you'd swear you could hear something shifting underneath. When I was a boy, my grandfather forbade me from going there. He said that the soil had memory, and that the memory was not kind. But after his death, curiosity began to eat at me. So one misty morning, I went alone. The path was overgrown, the fences rotted and swallowed by weeds. The field stretched out before me like a scar, empty, except for the faint remains of old pumpkin vines tangled across the earth. Yet, despite being abandoned for decades, the ground didn't look dead. In patches where the fog thinned, I saw faint orange veins glowing beneath the soil, like roots pulsing with slow, sleeping fire. At the far end of the field stood a scarecrow, or what was left of one. Its body was made of wood and rusted wire, the sackcloth head slumped to one side. But as I approached, I realized it wasn't a scarecrow at all. It was a man's coat, tattered, brown, half buried into the dirt, as if the earth itself had tried to swallow it. That's when I remembered the story. Elias Crow had been known in Hollow's End as a good man, though distant. He rarely came into town, preferring to tend to his fields and his pumpkins, which were said to be the sweetest in the county. But one summer, everything withered. The rains never came, the river dried, and the land cracked open like broken clay. His farm fell silent, and Elias was seen less and less. Then came a night of strange thunder, the kind that rolls without lightning. People in the village said they saw flickers of orange light over the ridge, like the glow of a distant fire. Some claimed they heard whispering voices carried on the wind. A week later, Elias returned to the village market. His cart overflowed with pumpkins, round, heavy, and shining with a faint glow even under the morning sun. They were the largest anyone had ever seen. When asked how he had managed it, he only said, "I gave the field what it wanted." That year, Hollow's End had more pumpkins than it could sell. Children carved them, women baked them into pies, and even the church used them to decorate for the autumn feast. But the older folk refused to touch them. They said the pumpkins were too warm to hold, and that if you looked long enough into their orange skin, you'd see your own reflection smiling back when you weren't. Then the disappearances began. It started small, a stray dog gone missing, a flock of crows found dead near the field. But on the night before the harvest festival, a young man named Peter Lang vanished while returning from the crow farm. His lantern was found at the edge of the field, still burning, its flame unmoving in the wind. The sheriff led a search party the next morning. They found Elias standing in his field, his eyes wide and unfocused, both hands pressed into the soil. The earth beneath him glowed faintly, as if something alive pulsed deep below. When the sheriff tried to pull him away, Elias whispered, "You shouldn't wake them." He was never seen again after that. By the time the villagers returned with reinforcements, the field was empty. All that remained were his boots, half buried in the dirt. After that night, Hollow's End changed. The townsfolk stopped farming near the ridge. The church banned all harvest rituals. And every year, on the night of the lanterns, they began lighting one lamp at the edge of Crow's Field, a small offering to keep whatever lay beneath from stirring. For decades, it worked. The fog stayed out of town. The nights were quiet. The soil slept. Until, of course, 50 years ago, the night the lantern wasn't lit. Standing in that field now, I could feel the story breathing beneath my feet. The fog clung to my boots, swirling in tiny spirals as if circling around me. And in the silence, I heard something faint, a rhythm like slow breathing, rising and falling, deep below the surface. Then came the smell. Not rot, not decay, but something sweet, almost pleasant, like overripe fruit mixed with ash. The scent of old harvest. The air shimmered faintly, and I saw the outline of a man at the far end of the field. He stood motionless, facing away from me, a faint glow spilling from one hand. It looked like the light of a lantern, dim and trembling. For a moment, I thought it was a trick of the fog, until the light pulsed once, then twice, and the shape began to turn. I didn't wait to see its face. I ran, stumbling through the mud and vines, not daring to look back until I reached the road. My chest burned, my hands shook, and yet the smell, that same strange sweetness, clung to me even as I reached my home. That night, I dreamt of the old pumpkins, glowing softly in the dark field, each one breathing, slow and steady, as if waiting for someone to wake them. When I told my grandmother the next morning, she only said one thing: "You've seen the field, remember?" And from that day on, I knew that Crow's Field had not forgotten its promise, nor the man who made it. Kindled the return of the pumpkin shadow. It happened on the 31st of October, 1956, a night colder than any I can remember. The fog had begun to roll in long before sunset, swallowing the hills, the road, even the old church steeple. By dusk, the whole village looked as though it were floating in clouds. Lanterns glowed like golden stars trapped on the ground. Every sound, a door creaking, a dog barking, a child laughing, came muffled and far away, as if the world had been wrapped in cotton. Back then, Halloween still hadn't become what it is today. There were no costumes from the city, no candies wrapped in foil. Just wooden masks, homemade pies, and old stories whispered over firelight. But that year, There was no celebration. The fog had made everyone uneasy. The elders said it was thicker than they'd ever seen. I was 15 then, restless, reckless, and foolish enough to ignore warnings. My friends and I had planned to play our usual trick, sneaking into the churchyard to ring the bell at midnight. But as I left my house that evening, the world outside was white and soundless. The path to the church was gone. Even my own breath vanished into the mist. Then, through that silence, I heard something, a faint rhythm, almost musical. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks. But as I walked closer to the edge of the village, the sound grew clearer, a soft, hollow clink, 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 like metal tapping gently against glass. Lantern light. It flickered faintly in the distance, orange and trembling, as if floating mid-air. I froze. Every part of me wanted to turn back, but something deeper, something curious and terrified all at once, kept my feet moving forward. The sound of the clinking grew louder, echoing through the fog until it filled my ears like a heartbeat. When I reached the fence of Crow's Field, I stopped breathing. The lantern was there, hanging from a crooked wooden post that shouldn't have been standing. Its flame burned steady, yet its light felt wrong, too still, too deep, like it wasn't shining outward, but inward. And behind that glow, half shrouded by fog, stood a shape. A man, tall, stooped, his head bowed. One arm held the lantern, the other hung at his side. I could make out the outline of a long coat, ragged, torn, and glistening faintly with dew. The air around him shimmered, bending the light like heat on summer stone. Then he moved. Slowly, almost stiffly, he turned toward me. The lantern light spilled across his face, or what was left of it. Half of it looked human, weathered and pale, the eye dull and lifeless. But the other half glowed, not with fire, but with something pulsing beneath the skin, faint orange cracks running across like roots beneath glass. The eye on that side burned faintly, not bright, but steady, as if it had been glowing for centuries. He raised the lantern slightly, as though to see me better, and in that moment, the fog behind him shifted, not from wind, but from movement. Shapes began to emerge from the mist, faint outlines of round objects scattered across the ground. Dozens of them. Pumpkins. They glowed softly, their skin webbed with the same orange cracks that lined his face. I took a step back. The lantern flickered once, and then I heard it. A whisper. Not words, just sound, like wind moving through hollow wood. But somehow, my name was in it. It came softly, from everywhere at once, a breath inside the fog. Thomas. My blood turned cold. My name hadn't been spoken aloud. I was alone. No one had followed me. Yet, in that moment, I felt eyes, hundreds of them, watching from within the mist. The man stepped forward. The light from the lantern wavered, spilling over the pumpkins, over the vines, over the earth that seemed to pulse with slow, living rhythm. The air smelled of smoke and sweetness, like roasted fruit and dying leaves. When he spoke again, it wasn't through words. It was through the lantern itself, the flame dancing wildly as if carried by a breath that came from inside it. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. Then the flame dimmed, and I saw something inside it. A face. Elias Crow's. The same man from my grandfather's stories. Eyes hollow, lips moving soundlessly inside the light. The next thing I remember is running. Through fog, through brambles, through the sound of that endless whisper following me. The world was white and orange and spinning, and when I finally burst through my front door, I collapsed on the floor. My grandmother pulled me into her arms, but the smell that clung to me, sweet and burned and earthy, made her cry. The next morning, the fog was gone. The lantern by the forest fence was found burned out, nothing but melted glass and ash. But something else had changed. The pumpkins in Crow's Field were gone. Every last one. In their place were small, round holes in the earth, like something had risen and walked away during the night. For weeks, people whispered about what I had seen. The church bell stopped ringing after sunset. The road to Crow's Field was blocked with stones, and my grandmother began leaving 2 lanterns instead of one for the spirit and one for me. But I never went back, not until many years later. And even now, after half a century, when I close my eyes and the autumn fog rolls in, I still see that light swaying in the mist, slow, steady, patient, like something waiting for me to answer. Candle the lantern still burns. Time has a way of softening things, memories, fears, even the edges of a nightmare. But some stories don't fade. They wait. They settle in the corners of your mind like dust that refuses to be swept away. 50 years have passed since that night. Hollow's End is no longer the same village it once was. The cobblestone road has been paved, the cottages replaced by painted houses with metal roofs. The old church stands empty, its bell long rusted. Children no longer wear paper masks. They wear store-bought costumes and carry plastic pumpkins for candy. They laugh louder than we ever did, fearless, bright, and unaware of the weight that autumn once carried here. Sometimes, when the younger folk ask me about the old days, I tell them bits and pieces, the parades, the smell of fresh bread, the harvest dances under oil lamps. But I never tell them about the field. I never tell them about the lantern. And yet, the older I get, the more I find myself drawn back to it, not in body, but in thought. It calls to me sometimes, late at night, when the wind changes direction and the air smells faintly of ash and fruit. That same sweetness, that same memory. 3 years ago, after my wife passed, I decided to visit Crow's Field one last time. The world had changed so much that I almost couldn't find the old road. The birch trees had grown wild, their roots breaking through what used to be the path. I walked slowly, leaning on my cane, the air heavy with silence. No one had been here in decades. When I reached the field, I stopped. It was smaller than I remembered. The ground was uneven, choked with weeds, the fence long since fallen. The soil was dark and cracked, lifeless at first glance. But then, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I saw it. Faint veins of orange light, running just beneath the surface, pulsing softly, like a sleeping heartbeat. And there, at the far end of the field, stood something I hadn't expected. A lantern. Old, rusted, its glass fogged from age, but still glowing. The light was dim, flickering weakly, as though it had been burning a very long time. It wasn't bright enough to cast shadows, yet somehow, it lit the entire clearing in a warm, breathing glow. I felt no fear then, only a strange, aching calm. I walked closer, the fog thickening around my legs, the air shimmering with soft, orange hues. Every step I took stirred up faint whispers, not words, just movement, like leaves turning over in the wind. When I reached the lantern, I knelt. The flame trembled, and for a moment, I thought it might die out. Then it steadied, and inside the glass, I saw a reflection. Not mine, Elias Crow. His face was the same as it had been in my youth, one half human, the other carved in faint pumpkin glow. But there was no malice in him now, no hunger, only exhaustion and something like peace. He looked at me for a long moment, then glanced toward the village, the roofs barely visible through the fog. I understood what he wanted without a word. He didn't want worship. He didn't want fear. He wanted remembrance. The curse, I realized, was never about punishment. It was about memory, about being forgotten. Elias had made a bargain not with evil, but with the shadow of time itself, a promise that his field, his harvest, his name would never fade. And for 777 years, the earth had kept that promise. I whispered into the fog, "You're not forgotten." The flame in the lantern brightened once, warm and full, as if in reply. Then, slowly, it began to fade. The orange veins beneath the soil dimmed, the air stilled, and for the first time in my life, the field felt truly quiet. When I left, I did not look back. But that night, from my window, I saw a faint glow through the trees, not bright, not burning, but steady, like the heartbeat of the land itself, still alive, still remembering. Now, every Halloween, I light a lantern on my porch, not for celebration, not for children, but for him, for the shadow that kept its promise. Sometimes, when the fog rolls in thicker than usual, I swear I hear it again, that soft clink, clink, clink of glass against metal, moving somewhere beyond sight. And in those moments, I smile, because I know the story isn't over. It never really ends. It only waits, resting beneath the soil until the fog returns. And when it does, the pumpkin shadow will rise once more, not in anger, not in vengeance, but simply to remind the living that even the forgotten deserve a light to guide them home. So if ever you find yourself walking through Hollow's End on a cold October night, and the fog curls thick around your feet, and you see a faint orange shimmer between the trees, don't be afraid. Stop. Watch. Listen. You may hear the soft swing of a lantern and a whisper through the mist. A name spoken so gently it feels like your own. And if you do, just nod your head and whisper back, "I remember." Then walk home before the fog grows deeper, because the light behind you will keep burning. And that is enough.